Hello, everyone. This is Janise Wiggins with Grant Me Success, and we are recording this video for you on behalf of our Nonprofit Leaders Academy. And so you guys may not know, but I recently started a Nonprofit Leaders Academy. It is a 12-week program where we take leaders from all over the country and we teach them about nonprofit leadership and everything that kind of goes along with that. We talk about board development, program development, nonprofit accounting and budgeting. Everybody wants to ask about the money. They want to know, how do we get to the money and how do we manage the money? So we discuss that. We talk about marketing and branding for nonprofit organizations, which is really important in building partnerships and collaboration. We talk about fundraising, grant writing, and a whole host of other topics. So what we have been doing is week to week, we've been inviting some guest experts and panelists to come on with me and discuss a particular topic in the realm of nonprofit leadership. And so today I am so excited to have here with me Miss Valerie Hicks. Miss Valerie Hicks is a licensed social worker by education. And she has a vast background in working in health and human services and social services. She was most recently the executive director of SAFY, Nevada. She is now retired, or I'll say refired. So congratulations, Valerie, on that achievement and getting to this point in your nonprofit career. But I have Valerie here with us, you all, because we are going to be discussing the mindset of a nonprofit leader. I think that it's just so very important for us to understand that while you may have the educational background, you may have technical skills, it definitely requires a particular mindset to work with some of the most challenging situations and individuals, whether they be clients and staff in the nonprofit arena. And there is just a way to navigate that. And so I have Valerie here that's going to share with us a little bit about her background and hopefully give you some insight that as you go through your career as a nonprofit leader, you can have these tools and these nuggets to know that you have got to train your mind to be ready for this work. And certainly if you're going to work in this field for 30, 40 years, as Valerie and many of her colleagues have. So Valerie, welcome. And thank you for joining us today. I'm going to just jump right into it. I can't really recall exactly, pinpoint it, how it is that you and I met. I have a sense that it was maybe 5 to 8 years ago, would you say?
I would say so. I moved to Las Vegas from Cleveland, Ohio in 2013. And at that point, because I was new to the community, I started going to community meetings so that I could kind of do a little environmental scan, if you will, to get the temperature. And I went to a couple of state-sponsored meetings, and there was this young woman who kept asking really good questions. And as a person who did not know people in this city, I was tuned into people who were smart. And I needed friends. I needed to know people, and I needed to know what was going on. So I sought you out, and I think we sought each other out. We saw each other a couple of times, and then at a break, we kind of smiled, and that was the beginning of things.
Yeah, I feel like it may have been, now that you bring that up, community meetings and forums. At the time, I was working with the state of Nevada, and perhaps it was at the Nevada Minority Health and Equity Coalition meeting. Maybe that's how, we met through that, or maybe some other community forums. But I remember, as you said, kind of looking across the room, and I saw a new face. I saw this woman who was also asking some really great questions and providing some really good information and insight. And I said, this woman has got to be from out of town. That's what I said to myself, because the people here in Nevada, I think differently perhaps than people who are from the Midwest or the East Coast. I think about it this way sometimes, that the people in the Midwest and East Coast is a little bit closer to the power center. When I say power center, I'm talking that metropolitan Washington, D.C., Maryland, Virginia area, where there are a lot of progressive and innovative ideas that are brewing. I remember that traveling to Washington, D.C. and Virginia, they were already talking about evidence-based practices and trauma-informed care long before I heard us talking about that here in the state of Nevada. So I remember seeing you and I said, oh, she's a woman of color. She's an executive director. And I was familiar with SAFY, having been a social worker myself here in Las Vegas for many years. And I said, I don't remember seeing her, and I don't remember her being the executive director of SAFY. I need to go out over and investigate this a little bit more. So for our listeners and viewers, can you share with us, who is Valerie Hicks? Just give us a little bit of background about yourself personally and then professionally.
Okay, well, I am a mother. I'm a wife. I have been married. We celebrated our 46th or 7th anniversary recently. I should know the exact number.
Congratulations.
We just know it's a lot. And so, right, we put a ring on it and it's just burned in there. And so I've been married to my high school sweetheart for many years. Wow. We have 2 adult sons. One is in California and one is in Illinois. And actually, it was the son in California that led me out here, because SAFY called me. I was with SAFY in Cleveland, and they called and said, hey, we would really like you to consider this position in Nevada. We've heard you have a granddaughter in California. It's so much closer. Would you consider? And so at that time, I only had the 1 grandchild, and I have 5. Wow. And so I moved out here so I could be closer. We could be closer to our 1 granddaughter. My husband was close to retirement, so it all seemed to kind of fall in place. I grew up in a community in Cleveland called Glenville. And I was home recently, and like so many of our urban areas, it has fallen on the times of disrepair that we know have come from years of neglect, from redlining and policies and procedures that were designed to decimate communities of color, in the way that infrastructures were developed, in the way that funds were allowed or not allowed to rehab and do things to our homes to improve them. So all of those things were part and parcel. But when my parents moved there in 1951 and they bought their home, it was called the Gold Coast. It was a mecca for Black people who wanted something better. And while Cleveland is currently known as a Rust Belt city, at that time, it was kind of like Atlanta or New York. It was the place that Black people, if you wanted to get a good job, because they had many manufacturing jobs, they had the best school system in the country at that time. Wow. And that is what led my parents to move from Washington, D.C. to Cleveland. Oh, wow. And my father's mother had remarried. His father had passed many years ago. His mother had remarried, and they lived in the Gold Coast area, right? Okay. So my parents moved there, and it was a time when there was hope in our community. As a child, I did not recognize the degree to which our communities were under siege. I did not recognize the burden that the adults around me were facing, because they carried it with grace and humility and hope. Absolutely. And I was a beneficiary of that hope. So when you say, who is Valerie? I'm a person who's hopeful, even when things seem to be going not so good. Yes, yes. And I have faith in the people around me. I grew up with Judge Williams on one side, Mr. Chenault on the other side, and he owned vending machines. Then next to Mr. Chenault was a day laborer, Mr. Tate, and he dug ditches. And then next to him was a county government worker My father worked at the post office. There was a teacher across the street. There were many housewives. There were many people who had many different Black experiences, but they understood that the one commonality of that Black experience was the racism that they were facing together. And so even though their life experiences and their jobs were very different, they were unified.
Yeah, and it's so interesting that you're able to point out all of those people in your community, because I'm sure that they had children, they had grandchildren, and you played with them and you were mentored by these people on your block, on your street, in your community. And absolutely. I think that that is one vital piece to kind of reinvigorate, if you will, communities. And
that is correct. Life. That is correct, because out of this community called Glenville came the mayor of Cleveland, Michael White. He lived on my street. Out of our little community came Stephanie Tubbs Jones, a congresswoman, and she was my best friend's cousin and a good friend of she was a little older, so she was a good friend of my brother, who's 5 years older. Out of that came a host of physicians, a host of educators, a host of social service workers. And what happened as I grew and my career grew, we all still work together.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so when you say, who is Valerie? Valerie is someone who was shaped by the hope and collaboration of a Glenville community that nurtured her and loved her. And even when we had the riots, and I saw community burn in 1965 from my back porch.
Yeah.
I was a child who was bused to Collinwood High School out of my neighborhood for major work. And Collinwood High School was on the cover of Time magazine for the number of race riots that they had every spring.
Wow.
Because even though we were children of tremendous promise and our parents were hopeful, the community that we were arriving to was not receptive to us.
Sure, yeah.
And they did not like the fact that we were there, but we were. And so what that also taught me was how to unify with people and to build collaboration and community, even within an environment that was hostile to you.
Yeah, absolutely. So it sounds like you had a pretty good core and foundation to begin with. And then at some point in time, you went off to college.
Yes.
Got some degrees.
Yes.
Tell us about that, and then tell us about your transition into your career life.
So I went to Ohio University, beautiful campus. That's what I loved. There was no big thought process. My parents said, go wherever you want to go. And I wanted to go to Ohio University. It's beautiful.
All right, awesome.
And I got my undergraduate in social work there. And going to school in the 70s was a time of change. And so there was a lot of receptivity to the kinds of things that I was interested in. After graduating from Ohio University, I worked for about 1.5 years as an income maintenance worker. That meant that I was the person that if you needed food stamps, I was the person who determined your eligibility for those food stamps. And while on the face of it, it seems like a not so important job, it was a very important job in helping to shape my mind about what the face of poverty looked like.
Absolutely.
There are so many misconceptions about who poor people are.
Right.
But what I saw were poor people who worked hard, poor people who wanted something better for their children, poor people who spent a lot of time being poor. It is very time consuming to be poor, because in addition to going to work and maybe catching a bus because you can't afford the car, you also have to stop at this food stamp office. You have to work that into your day. And most of the time, people who need food stamps don't have the kind of jobs that accommodate that kind of need. And so
it's what we call in the social worker human service arena, the working poor, right?
That is correct.
I think that people tend to think about this concept of poor people, and that meaning that you don't work, you don't have a job, you're lazy, you're at home. But no, we have a working poor class of people who go to work every day, 8 hours to 10 hours a day. They just are not earning a living wage, as we would call it, or the cost of things are in our economy are just really outpacing the wage that they receive at home.
That
And
is
so
correct.
it's very interesting that you bring up that point, that it's not the person just sitting at home on their laurels, as people will say, that is eligible for food stamps, but you have maybe a two-parent household nowadays
Right.
that is working, and they have several mouths to feed in the household, or maybe even just themselves. And it becomes difficult at some point when you've got eggs at one point in time here in our recent economy being like $9 and $12 a dozen, like $1 per egg.
My son and his wife live outside of Chicago. They have 4 children under 7 and under.
Mhm.
Daycare for their children is over $3,000 a month.
Wow. Wow.
3,000. They're paying
Wow.
big, and they get great daycare.
Mm-hmm. And so you've got to pay that daycare. You've got to make a significant amount of money beyond that, because I've heard it say, you know, like a statistic that I've heard about even just housing, how much of your income you should be spending in housing. I've heard the figure somewhere between 25% to 35%, no more than that, should be your housing. Well, my goodness, if you're paying 35% of your income in housing, and then my goodness, 30% of it in childcare, what's left for the transportation, food, clothing, just basic needs, basic, we're
Exactly.
talking basic needs. And so, you know, and those figures, you know, back then, perhaps people were not paying that. Maybe they were paying $300 a month in childcare. But at that time, you know, in the 60s, 70s, it was like paying $3,000, you know.
Well, and he's paying, he and his wife are paying for the best childcare they can afford.
Yeah. Yeah.
My grandchildren are blessed. That's very good for them. Yay for them.
Yeah.
But guess what? Most people can't do that.
Mm-hmm.
And so when you look at programs like Head Start, where's the funding for Head Start? They are located in communities, but there's a wait list. Can people get there? You know, is it close to their homes? Services that we think are available are not always as accessible as we would like to think. And you made a point earlier. I want to go back to something that you said a little bit earlier. You made the comment about the difference between the mentality, the mindset of folks in Nevada versus people on the East or West Coast. And one of the things that happened when I was moving out here is I did a little research on the community. And I learned in 1948, which was the year my brother was born, 1948, there were 3,000 people in Clark County, in Las Vegas. Yeah. There were 3,000 people in my high school when I graduated.
Right.
So what that said to me is this is a very young community.
Exactly.
And even though, you know, we're a young country.
Yes.
And we look at ourselves and say, well, you're 200 or 300 years old. But in fact, Las Vegas had 3,000 people in 1948. So when you look at the fact that we're over 1 million now, the infrastructure had to grow. The schools have to grow. The child welfare system has to grow. The court systems have to grow. All of the community safety net programs need to grow. Yeah. And so what I saw when I moved out here was a void in the safety net services.
Yeah, absolutely. And we'll get more into that. I want to back up a little bit before we get there.
Okay.
So you were working, sounds like, in a government agency. At what point did your career shift and switch to nonprofit sector?
It shifted when my father, who was a Prudential insurance salesman, had a customer whose father worked at Case Western Reserve University. And my father knew I wanted to go to graduate school.
Okay.
And so through the contact that he provided me there, I was able to apply and get into Case Western Reserve. That put me into a network of people through my internship and just through networking with people that set my career up on a pathway to working with children and families. And when I graduated from Case Western Reserve, I went to work for an agency in Cleveland called Beachbrook, which was a 150-year-old agency that provided, at that point, it was a residential treatment center, but it was evolving and in a place of change. And it went from being a residential treatment center to a agency that provided community-based services of which residential care was one service.
Yeah.
And I did that for about 20 years. I did that from the point of graduation from graduate school until my children, my youngest, graduated from college. And then I watched that agency go from 50 people to 450 people. And
Wow.
I was able to grow and learn some.
And in what time frame? In what time frame?
This would have been between 1979 and the early 2000s.
So about a 20-year span.
26 years, yes.
Okay.
And at that point, I started my work in special needs adoption. So I was placing children for adoption who were like the children that I came to work with at SAFY. These were older children. These were children who had emotional problems or had some physical disabilities. They had challenges that in the old world made them have a label called unadoptable. In fact, no child is unadoptable. Right. You just have to find the right parent for that child.
That's right.
And my job was to find the right parent for that child. And because I was young and ignorant, I didn't know that that was a hard job.
Right.
And so I placed a lot of kids. I learned early on, I asked them, I said, well, how do you get parents? And they said, well, we have a child waits column that comes out on Sunday. And when people call, we take those names and follow up. I said, well, what if nobody calls? What if nobody wants other children? There was silence. And so at that point, it occurred to me, well, maybe somebody needs to tell the community we got these kids. So I started going to community meetings. I started going to PTA meetings. I started going to union meetings because I needed people with jobs and benefits, right? So yes. I started going to union meetings.
Yeah, because they had to qualify to be adoptive parents,
exactly,
right?
Exactly. And many of our children, and I'm not a traditionalist in the sense that I think two-parent families have some magic, but for some of our children, they did because of the challenges they were having in school and whatnot. And some of these unions had very traditional homes. They had a wife at home and they had a husband who made good money. So it worked out in that way for some of our kids. But other children needed single moms. We had young girls who had been sexually abused who could not tolerate living in a household with a male. That the home of choice for them might be a single mom. So it was really a matter of doing that. And so I did that for a number of years, but in doing that, I started going to the community, and that opened the eyes of the agency I worked for about the role of community. Not that I was the only person that did that, but I think that their own knowledge of what was happening in child welfare aligned with what I was doing, and they started talking to me about it.
Well, that's kind of that. Now you're bringing up, you're merging some topics that we discuss here in the Nonprofit Leaders Academy, which is one, the mindset of a leader. You are already using that mindset of a leader to be proactive, to say, wait a minute, we don't have to wait for the community to come to us. We must go into the community. And that definitely is a leader's mindset in the way that you ask the question. Also, that is also another leadership skill that you would even think to ask, to say, wait, and question the norm, right, of what was going on.
So growing up as a child in the civil rights movement, we were taught to not accept the status quo. The status quo is just that. It's somebody's interpretation of something. It's the status quo. Do we accept the status quo? No. And so that mindset went with all of the children of our community as they went into their respective fields. It was a matter of, what is it that you want to see happen?
Absolutely.
And how do you make it happen?
And all of that ties into taking the mindset of a leader and translating that into collaborations and community partnerships. And then it sounds like you're even talking about some marketing and branding there too, because how is it that people are coming to learn about our organization? Look, corporate organizations put a lot of money into marketing and branding. And I think about the nonprofit sector as a business. It's an industry, right? It is a sector of industry, and you have got to market your nonprofit organization and services and programs so that people will know that they're even available. You know, I hear oftentimes about organizations, they complain about not having enough money. Do you know that there are some organizations out there that complain about having too much money, meaning that they've gotten this grant from whatever source, a foundation, a state entity, a federal government, a county, a city, they have this grant money sitting and they can't spend it fast enough, right? Well, you've got to get out there, you've got to market, you've got to use this mindset of a leader to figure out the strategies of how to reach the community that you intend to serve. And that is an example of what you just shared with us, and it is an example of just that. You said, I'm not going to sit around and wait for the phone to ring. I don't know if anybody knows that I'm sitting here on the hotline, you know?
Right, right. And there was another thing that you raised. One of the things that I learned early on from my parents was money does rule. Money counts. And so as I started working in the nonprofit area, everybody told me, it's not about the money. Well, it ain't. It's about the money. But the difference is, what do you do with it? So if I'm a for-profit, I take my money and I pay it out to shareholders. Or if I'm the owner of the company, it comes back to me. But if I'm a non-for-profit, I want to make as much money as I can. And I want to pour that money back into my programs. I want to be able to hire the smartest, the best people. And when I hire them, I want to keep them.
That's right.
I heard from my foster parents, you have too much turnover. Every time we get used to a case manager, they're gone. You know, the mental health services, the supports aren't there. Every time we get a trained clinician, they leave for more money. So in spite of the fact that people say the world doesn't work about money, yes, it does.
It does.
And the only time I heard people say money doesn't count is when they're talking about poor people or people of color.
Right.
And when you talk about poor people and people of color, everybody wants to come and save us.
Yeah.
I have often said early on in my career that if you paid many of the families that we work with $50,000 a year, they'd be fine. They don't need us. They need us because we don't want to fund their schools. They need us because we don't want to equitably hire and train and support their ascension in the companies that are run by people that don't look like them. That is why we need these kinds of things.
We're back to the conversation about the working poor. I mean, it's and about wages and equity in wages. We're back to that conversation and dialogue, because I think in the nonprofit sector, when you're talking about the staff and them earning a comparable wage to what their for-profit colleagues are earning, look, quite frankly, this nonprofit staff don't want to turn up in the same situation as their clients.
Wait a minute.
They don't want to be waiting in line with them.
You have hit upon something, because I can't tell you how many times I had check cashing companies, banking companies call because of employees not paying. I did not look at that as a shame on that employee. I looked at that as a shame on us as an industry.
Absolutely.
Because here's the other piece to that. We're asking the same thing of them. We're asking them to take that college expertise. They had to take out loans just like the guy who was in business, and they've got loans to pay. But they have to have a good car, not just a car, because we're asking them to put children in that car and take them places. So they have to have a new car, and that car has to have top insurance.
That's right.
And so we're asking all of these things from young people who are coming out of school. And then we say, but you know, you're here in it for the help of the people. We don't want to pay you. I had a secretary when I was in Cleveland who had to apply for food stamps. That broke my heart. And that was maybe 25 years ago. That turned my thinking in terms of feeling like we really had to advocate, not just for the children, but for the staff who was there to serve the children.
Absolutely.
Because everyone on my staff has a responsibility. It's, you know, when you talk about the mindset, I believe that when a family or child walks through our door, everybody, secretary, maintenance people, everybody's got a responsibility. Everybody's about that treatment process. And yet you can't get people to buy into what you're talking about when they're worried about whether they can afford their groceries. Why do they care about my kids more than they care about their kids? I should not even expect that. That's
Valerie,
it.
you have me getting ready to almost jump through this screen because you are just really sharing some great and excellent information. Oh, awesome, awesome, awesome. So tell us, at some point, you started to elevate in your career, I'm sure, and be promoted. You're such a dynamic leader. I'm sure that you went through a period and stage of personal development and growth and understanding how all of these pieces were fit and knit together. And sounds like you were at the organization, at the one nonprofit organization, for quite a long time. Tell
Yes.
us about what support you either received or lack of support as you began to ascend in your career as a nonprofit leader. Tell us what that dynamic looked like, the support or lack thereof.
I would say there were two gentlemen at Beachbrook at the time that I was there. Don Harris, who was the executive director, and Julius Simmons, who oversaw community-based programs. And we started a new program, Family Preservation, which was in-home therapy. At a time when everybody thought that the client should come to you, we were saying, no, go out into the homes. And so as we were doing this, it was bringing a different mindset, and we needed different funding. And so I was doing a pilot of that program, and the CEO, Don Harris, wanted me to talk about that pilot to our commissioners in Cuyahoga County so that we could get funding for it. La-di-da, I'm happy to do that, you know, and I skip on down to this meeting, and I'm telling them how it's going to save them money. You know, the thing my father always told me is about the money. So I told these people, if you pay money for this, your children and families won't need deeper end services. They won't need to go into the child welfare system. And that costs so much money.
You save here. If you do an ounce of prevention, you'll save on the treatment side. Sure.
Absolutely. And so no one had directed me to give that message. It just was the message that resonated with me. And so that was a turning point in how our CEO saw me. And he started spending a lot of time with me. He sent me to a training in Boston, Innovation Associates training. I don't even know if they're still around, but there were leaders from Coca-Cola, leaders from China who had sent people there. So it allowed me to experience leadership outside of the nonprofit community. And that was valuable and invaluable in terms of understanding how to engage community, because we needed people like those people to help my people in our programs.
When I think about the mindset, the term that comes up for me that I have begun to refer to myself as is a social entrepreneur. Look,
exactly.
You're talking about people being from Coca-Cola and coming here from China and many other corporate backgrounds. And we've already said, look, we've got to think about the nonprofit sector as an industry, and certainly as a business. I mean, you incorporate with the Secretary of State, you got to work with the IRS to get this designation. Sounds like a business to me.
Exactly.
And so you've got to think of it in that way. And as a leader, you've got to think as an innovative business leader and a social entrepreneur. And it sounds like that's what your CEO had identified for you, that he wanted to build this and already identified it, that you had it there. He wanted to cultivate it.
That is exactly correct. For you. They wanted to do that. And so as opportunities came, they put me in leadership positions. I became a supervisor for the Family Preservation Program, then its director, but all the time training me. And so I think one of the things that I've learned is that when money seems tight, people want to stop training. They don't want people to go to training. That is the kiss of death. I remember going to a training and they talked about two companies. Hewlett Packard was one and another company. And one company just flourished during a downturn. But that was because they still invested in training and they still did innovation within their programming. The other company buttoned down the hatches, said, we're going to protect what we got. We're not going to lose anything. And they lost everything.
Wow.
And so what that taught me was, even in times of distress, you have to keep your head up and look out.
Yeah.
The world is not inside, it's outside. And so as a leader, you have to be maintained, you have to be committed to listening to the people in your community, listening to all of them, not just those presumed leaders, but what about your neighbor? What about your children? The best information I got was from children who SAFY served. They would roll into my office. They say, I haven't been in here before. And I said, well, what works for you? I had a child who was so upset. Why? Because this child identified with the LGBTQ community, and we had foster parents who were trying to pray it away.
Oh, yeah.
And so this child had a conversation with me that broke my heart, and it changed how I wanted to train our foster parents.
Yeah.
I did not have a desire to force fit children into homes that were not appropriate for them. It meant that sometimes we could not place a child. Sometimes we say no. We can't do everything all the time and do it well. And so you learn as a leader that when things don't work, it's your job to figure out when it's not going to work and stop doing it.
Yeah.
We sometimes get in that mindset of, well, that's how it's always been. I know, but that was by 1942. This is 2023.
Look, if people have driven a manual car or stick shift, look, them gears will tell you real quick when it's time to press down on that clutch and shift a gear. People have got to learn to begin to hear the gears grinding. And when the gears are grinding, you have got to shift.
That's exactly, that's exactly right. And so that is the other element of being a leader. You're not doing what everybody else is doing. You're looking down the road and saying, what will the population or the industry I'm here to serve need? They need you to be strategic.
Yeah.
We all hear about strategic plans, and people do a strategic plan and then they set it up on a shelf somewhere and the board's happy and the staff
and
is
it's about this thick and it look real pretty and it's on pretty paper. Yeah.
Yeah, and they, you know, they give it out and they get funding with it and stuff, and that's all good. But what's the purpose of it? It should be a living, breathing document, and it's the leader's job to make it alive. It's not the leader's job to go to a meeting and everybody say, hey, we got this strategic plan. It is the leader's job to take the words from the strategic plan, extrapolate them into meaningful actions that our staff then takes to improve the lives of our children and families.
Yeah, so you've talked about the support that you receive. Was there any lack of support or things that you wish could have been different for you, or things that you saw that was a lack of support that you made a conscious decision as a leader yourself to do differently for your staff as you were beginning to develop leaders yourself?
Well, you know, I think I totally took for granted when I was in Ohio the diversity that was there. There were many people at the table that looked like me. There were many people in decision-making places that looked like me. And so there was a freedom when you went to meetings and a common foundation of understanding of where you started. And so that meant that the work was a little bit easier. When I moved out here, I saw something very different. One, we did not have enough educational systems, so we didn't have a labor pool. So many times people were hiring who they could hire. I don't know that they were the best hire, but they were the person that was available.
And you mean the labor pool in Health and Human Services?
Yes, yes,
okay.
yes. At my office in Cleveland, I could look out from my office and there were 6 universities visible to me from my office. And we have wonderful universities here, great institutions. And I know that our community is committed to growing their impact and the capacity, but it's part of that newness of Las Vegas. Right. And as a new person coming here, it was an eye opener.
Yeah, absolutely.
And it was a constraint. And what I found was the leadership within our organization did not have an understanding about the racial and cultural differences here and what that meant to the service delivery here.
Yeah.
I went to meetings and I found that there were people sometimes in leadership who would make very disparaging comments about the children we serve. And I wondered to myself, how can you be effective in your leadership position when you don't respect these children? When you don't respect the foster parents? How will that work out? And I think we're seeing some elements of that now because there's a tremendous need for foster homes. But I
Yeah,
think
it
it's a,
speaks very loudly. And we talk about how the culture of organizations or of systems flow from the top down. And certainly there are times when it flows from the bottom up, when you have someone with a progressive mindset who's not afraid to speak up the way that you were in your organization. But most often it starts at the top, and whatever those leaders' beliefs are about their organizations, the staff they have, the volunteers, and the clients they serve, that understanding affects the culture and the demeanor of the way that people act and treat one another and treat the people involved in the entire system. So that's an excellent point that you raise.
exactly. I recall being in a meeting and a leader in the mental health field in our county system made the comment that the children at Child Haven were not grateful, that they were acting, like little animals or something. And I'm like, what?
Mm.
Why would a child be grateful to be removed from their family and being placed in aggregate care with a lot of people they don't know? Who signs up for that? So that mindset troubled me.
Yeah, it's that
Because
lack of empathy.
a lack of empathy, and some of that comes from a lack of cultural understanding, cultural competency. I think, one of the things when you ask about what were some of the shifts or differences that I've seen, in Ohio, there were about 50% African-American, in Cleveland, 50% African-American, 50% other majority population. And there was Hispanic and smaller Asian population. And you would see, in terms of child welfare referrals, about a 50% referral rate of children from communities of color. When I moved to Vegas, I saw that there were about 10% African Americans in Las Vegas, in Clark County. But my referral list was about 50 to 60% African American, which suggests a tremendous level of disproportionality. And disproportionality typically comes when people don't understand the culture of the people that they're there to serve. Now, disproportionality was an issue in Cuyahoga County as well. But what I saw them do in Cuyahoga County was bring people from all the various systems, the justice system, child welfare, school systems, and look at what were the points of intersect when some of these decisions got made that led to the disproportionate number of children being placed in systems that were not viewed positively. Why were they removed? Why were they suspended? What was going on? And so I saw that community not only understand that issue, but grapple with that issue and come to some resolutions about how to address that issue.
Yeah.
I moved here and no one even saw the issue. And I did not feel that there was an appetite to learn about how to mitigate the problems that led to that issue. And that was heartbreaking to me, because what that meant was more children were going to be ripped from their families. And what I know from research that has been done through the Child Welfare League of America is that more children of color are removed from their families. Those families receive fewer opportunities for services, and those children stay in care longer.
Yeah, yeah.
So those are the things that we want to mitigate against.
Absolutely. You brought up so much there. That was so juicy, a lot to abstract from that. And I know that our listeners and viewers are getting so much from you right now. And I just thank you and appreciate you for sharing all of what you have shared up until this point. But you brought up a term, intersection. And I want you to share a little bit now, if you would, about the intersection of you working in nonprofit, being a woman and a woman of color in the executive suite. And talk a little bit about those dynamics and what challenges you face, maybe just by the nature of being a woman of color, in nonprofit executive leadership?
Well, I think one of the things that strikes you in child welfare is that while so many of the consumers are children of color, you go up a level and you will find workers of color. And then you get to supervisors, that first level supervisor level, and you see some color, but the color begins to fade.
Mm-hmm.
And then you go up to a director level and you see some color, but the color begins to fade. And then as you go up further to the real decision makers, it doesn't look like the community at all.
Right.
Something has happened.
Mm-hmm.
And so what I find is that we don't have the opportunity. Succession planning is so important, but we have to be very intentional about how we create opportunities for people of color to be in those executive suites, to hear how decisions get made, to learn how budgets run, to see how to interface with board members. And so what I found, and I found this sadly even within my organization I retired from, is that there was a tendency to see people that look like them as potential leaders, and to give people who look like them opportunities to sit in at the seat of power, as they say, and to learn. And then after they get that learning, to say, see, they've got that learning, let's elevate them.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
And so when I came to SAFY, it was a very eye-opening experience because it was very different than the experiences I've had in other places. There are many, many good people throughout the SAFY organization, but the leadership and the supervision that I received when I came was lacking.
When and where did you start with SAFY? And tell people what the SAFY acronym means, because there's some people that are watching us that may not be familiar with SAFY in the way that we are.
SAFY stands for Specialized Alternatives for Families and Youth. It is an organization that started in Ohio. And so we have 7 SAFY divisions in Ohio, in various cities in Ohio. We are in 7 states. And within those states, we have 29 divisions of SAFY. Gotcha. Our industry primarily is treatment foster care. That is foster care for children who have emotional problems and whose needs supersede the capacity of your traditional families to care for them.
So when and where did you start with SAFY?
I started with SAFY in 2011, July of 2011.
And we've said it here, we've alluded to it. You are now retired from SAFY, but when did you retire from SAFY?
I retired in February 2023.
And when you left SAFY, you were the executive director
of SAFY of Nevada.
Uh-huh. Okay. Yes.
Yeah. And so yeah, I spent 2 years, or no, 10 years out here. And I have seen our industry change and evolve for the better.
And I think you started sharing with us, but I just wanted to allow people to know when and where you started with SAFY. And so you worked for SAFY in Ohio first. Correct. Prior to being recruited to SAFY Nevada. Tell us about some of those differences that you saw in the communities working for the same entity, presumably the same dynamics as far as the clientele that you were serving, but maybe it was different when you came here. Tell us about some of those differences. It
was very different. In Cuyahoga County, there was a very collaborative, open relationship with our child welfare department. They invited you in very readily when there were things that were not right. They wanted the provider community to be an active participant in reconciling some of the problems that we were facing in our industry. I moved out here and it was like a cold glass of water.
Well, you need that in Las Vegas, though. Now, Valerie.
You do. You're right. But you know,
But
I
you
went
said
to
the environment was ice cold as
the
far
ice
as
cold
the
environment.
relationship between perhaps the community providers and the government entities responsible for child welfare delivery.
That is correct.
services.
And there were a lot of agencies that were making a lot of money off of the backs of these kids, to be quite frank with you, and not providing quality service. And so I think what those of us who were interested in providing quality service decided was we needed to band together. We needed to set some standards for what was quality service. And SAFY had been certified or credentialed through COA. And we
Tell us what is COA.
A Council of Accreditation. It's like a good housekeeping seal for nonprofits. And
Gotcha.
They come out and they look at your policies and what you're doing. They interview the people you serve and they decide if you're doing an adequate or a great job or not. And so it felt like some of the agencies out here were very rogue. They paid foster parents a lot of money, but they provided no support, no services. It seemed like some people were making a lot of money, but the kids weren't getting the care. And so we felt like we needed to say something about that. Because if you want to be a part of a change, you have to speak to your own weaknesses as well. And within our industry, the lack of quality was a weakness. But we also saw that there were people who were being invited into our community to take part in the funding of that community, but they weren't providing the services to that community. And so we also had to address that at a legislative level, because I had never been in a community where there were $1 million contracts let with no bid. That was something new to me. And so I just wanted to clarify with other legislators, is that the norm? Is that something you're aware of? Is that something you support? Because sometimes people don't know. Good people do bad things because they just don't know. And so I felt like we needed to have a better relationship with our commissioners. We had to have a better relationship with our senators, our congresspeople, so that they understood what the field of treatment foster care brought value to in our community. Why should they care if we weren't bringing value to the community? And so we had two things to do: bring value, up our game, and to share that message with the broader community who could impact funding decisions and policy decisions. We met with Medicaid because we did not have a good relationship with Medicaid. And I know this gentleman is gone, Dwayne Young. Dwayne Young.
Yeah, I remember. I think he came from the East Coast.
Okay, so Dwayne,
I think, to Nevada or from the South. I don't remember exactly.
I don't know where he came from, but I knew he came in the middle of things and he turned things around at Medicaid. And we went from having to me, an acrimonious relationship with people we should have been very closely working with, to having a good working relationship. And so for me, the most important thing was to bridge those relationships and create a structure from which that work could happen long after I'm gone.
Yeah.
Long after I'm gone.
Absolutely. And see, that's another thing that you are hitting on, just about this mindset of a nonprofit leader, you guys. I hope you guys are catching these nuggets. Is that you talked about succession planning.
Yes.
And so it sounds like from the very beginning of when you touched down here to Nevada, not that you were looking ahead for the hills, but you knew that at some point your retirement, just from all of the work that you have been doing in the community, at some point would come to an end in the way that you were doing it then. Certainly your work is continuing because you are here with me now. You're just doing your work in a different way. I think once a social worker, always a social worker, lifelong social worker, right? Whether it's with our families and our friends, our community, right? People probably call you and ask you for your advice as a social worker, just like they do with me too, or they send a text and they say, this person is in the hospital. What should we do? This person's maybe is involved with the child welfare system in our family, or we have a friend, and what could we do better? What could we do differently? How could we make the system move on our behalf? And so it sounds like from the very beginning, you hit the ground running with building relationships improving systems, knowing that at some point in time, your term there as a leader with SAFY would end, and you wanted to set up a success path for the next leader that would come along. Tell us a little bit about that, more of how you operationalize that within the organization.
Well, I think within any organization, leaders should surround themselves with top-notch people. One of the things I learned is you hire the smartest people. They could be smarter than me. I need people smarter than me. And especially if you're doing a job that's different than mine, that level of expertise you bring is going to inform how I make decisions. But I can only make quality decisions if I've got a quality person feed me information. So you really want to hire the smartest. And succession planning sounded sensible when I talked about it because I was 60 years old then. So people were like, oh, okay, that makes sense. But the truth of the matter is I always looked at succession planning because I never thought I was going to stay any place forever. And if I choose to work someplace, then I want it to be better when I leave. I don't want to see, it does not do my heart good to think that a place died after I left. And so I'm looking around for hiring the best mix of people possible. And then you give that mix of people opportunity to do pieces of your job, opportunity to be trained in different aspects of their job. And you see who blossoms and who wants it. And then you have candid conversations with people. What are your career paths? Would you like this job I have? You know, we have to ask people that. Do you want this job? I think people are scared to ask.
That is so interesting because most people would not ask that question. You want my job? You know, you about to be fired. I'm going to nitpick and find every little thing to start writing you up to figure out a way for you to get up out of here because you want my job. But it is such a different mindset that you have to ask that question in a genuine way and to say, and I'm going to help you get it.
Right, right. That's my job. My job is to keep the train running. It's not to stay here forever. And so if I'm hiring and bringing the right kind of leadership in, hopefully there will be some ability for succession planning within the organization. But if they don't want it, that's okay too. We can look external to the organization. And I told them that. I said, you know, if you don't want this job, there are other people in the community that I have an eye on. You know, I'll be more direct with them in my conversation if you don't want this job, because nothing's a gimme. You know, people still need to apply. People still need to want the job. I'm not.
Or there's a lateral move that they can make, right? So we think about planning, and maybe it's not always planning up, but it's building out.
Correct. It's that, and it's looking at what are the skill sets that you think a person has that you want to build on, and what are the ones they don't have that you think they need exposure to.
Yeah, and filling in the gaps.
Exactly. Unfortunately, when I came here, I did not have a supportive administrative structure at that time. And so that does make your job a lot easier. But I also think it's the job of the leader not to put that on their staff. You know, you don't go around complaining to your staff about, and they did this, because first of all, nobody cares. Secondly, they've got their own job to do. They've got their own families to do. Now, certain things come out, you know, as things do, things come out, and that's okay. But it's not my job to build an alliance against someone else. That's not my job. My job is to keep you focused on what I need you to do.
Yes.
Now I fight my own battles, and I've told my staff that. I don't need you to fight my battles. I'll fight my own battles, and I fought my own battles.
Yeah. Oh, good stuff, good stuff, good stuff. Tell us now, how important were partnerships for SAFY? Because you already shared that you were new here in Nevada. You were trying to get a sense of which way is the water flowing, and, you know, do we need to continue to go down the river with the way that it's going, or do we need to fight upstream a little bit because there's something going on upstream that's flowing down here that's not so good for us? You know, when the water is polluted, you've got to get to the source and figure out. So sometimes you got to swim upstream.
That is
to get to that source. And so along the way, whether it's you're going with the flow or against the grain, you've got to develop some partnerships, a tribe, a community. You've got to get some allies, some friends along the way.
Yes.
What did that look like for you? What organizations or what types of organizations did you find that was valuable for you to partner with, or get an allegiance and alliance with, or just make an introduction? I think you named one sector, which is legislators. So very important that these nonprofit organizations know who their legislators are, whether they be on the local level, city, county, at the state level. You've got senators and assembly people, and then on the federal level as well, and knowing who your congressperson is and who your state legislators are that's representing the constituency on many different levels. So that's one arena. You talked about that, but who else did you find that it was important for you to engage with?
Well, I think, as I started seeing that there were challenges in dealing with some of the major systems that I needed to create relationship with, I was fortunate enough to be introduced to different community people who had those relationships. The one woman, I started an advisory council, and I brought in people who knew people. And the chair of my advisory council at that time was a woman by the name of April Masterluca. She is the executive director of ALS. We had nothing to do with ALS, but she is a lifelong resident, grew up here in Las Vegas, cares about Las Vegas, cares about the children and families of Las Vegas. And in meeting her, I was just able to lay out what my concerns were, what my challenges were in terms of meeting people, and she introduced me to people. She went with me to some meetings because she knew that her relationship would help me create relationship. I went to school meetings, at the time there were some issues going on with the schools. So I wanted to hear about what was happening in the schools, because our children go to schools. And we will only be able to serve them appropriately and well if we and the schools are in partnership about what needs to happen. Now, we have not evolved to that level. We haven't gotten there, but we still need to have those relationships. And so I would say partnerships with schools, partnership with the faith-based community. SAFY is located on Rancho, and right across from us is the Las Vegas Center for Spiritual Learning.
Oh, yeah. Mm-hmm.
And they have been wonderful to SAFY. They are an entity that takes faith and puts it into action at every need. And so they became wonderful partners with us, lending us their space, lending us their time. We had yoga classes over there for our children.
Remember, I attended a conference that I believe you all
had.
We
had a mental health, right.
We had a conference. Mm-hmm. There was also, I think, a suicide prevention training that I attended there. Mm-hmm.
Yes. And so when I think of Stacy and her colleague, I just know that they brought so much value.
So it sounds like you went out into the community to seek out whether they call them like gatekeepers or just leaders in the community who already had a broad network, and you linked arms with them and said, introduce me to some of these other movers and shakers in the community. Who should I know?
Who should I know? I met people like yourself. Mm-hmm. Who told me, maybe you want to try this meeting. It was because of the meeting I had with you that led me to a state meeting that led us to seek funding for reproductive education.
Oh, wow.
And
you guys got that funding.
We got that funding.
Yes.
We were able to provide the children who were in our foster homes with that training, but we were also able to provide it to children who were in juvenile justice facilities and to the broader community, because we are a part of the community. We don't want to just serve as our little niche. We want to say, well, where can we bring value to even the broader community? Yeah. And so through that meeting, I can't even draw up her name, but a young lady who was with the state, and she worked with us to get access to more training through another curriculum in that area, and continue to work with us over a period of years so that we were able to continue that funding.
Yeah, yeah.
So I don't know how many unplanned pregnancies that we may have stopped and lives we may have changed because something didn't happen. But I will always appreciate that opportunity.
Yeah, absolutely. When would you say, it sounds like you started laying a lot of groundwork as soon as you got here. When would you say that you started to see the fruits of your labor, of the groundwork that you were laying? And I asked that for the newer nonprofit leaders who are maybe just getting started out. They are new founders of nonprofits. They are new board members, or maybe their organization has been around for a while and they just haven't, they're kind of chugga on the train, and they haven't got on the super speed highway just yet. And they can begin to get a little tired, discouraged, whatever the term may be, right? Worn out. I don't know.
Burnout.
Yeah, burnt out. We call it burnout in the social work field. And so when did you start to see the fruits of your labor that you were laying the foundation for? And granted, you came into an organization that already had some foundation. So, so I understand that. But the work that you were doing, when did you start to see things grow or change?
There's another larger organization like SAFY, and Dave and I began to meet. And when Dave Doyle and I met, we had common concerns about things, and we just developed an approach for how we wanted to work with the broader community. And so I think things changed when we connected.
And were you mentioned working with a coalition. Was this like in a coalition that you all were working in together?
We developed that coalition together.
Okay, because I remember at some point in time when you and I started, networking and meeting for lunch or coffee, or I would come over to your office and sit with you and just have dialogue. And our relationship began to blossom. You took me along to what I believe was a couple of like foster care association type meeting. Is that the, okay.
So that started.
Okay.
And
so it's like an association of foster care agencies.
Right. It's FFTA, Foster Families Treatment Association.
Okay.
And we were part of a national association. And we wanted to ensure that we were the drivers of our own train. And so we brought a woman, Dr. Laura Boyd, out to our community. And she did a strategic planning effort with the providers of treatment foster care. And she said something that was so enlightening. And this was a shift for us as providers. She said, "You guys sound like victims." She said, you talk so much about the children and what's happened and systems doing this and that to the children, but you guys sound like them. And that was so true, because every time we would say, well, we need that, well, we can't do that, well, we tried that, or, nothing. People were so bound by the constraints that they could not see the opportunity for change. And so when she came and said that, everybody was like, what? Yeah. And it shifted how we thought of ourselves and how we did business from that point forward.
Yeah. That you've got to, the organization itself can't find itself, or the leader of the organizations can't find themselves in the same situations as the clientele that they are serving as a mindset.
That's right. And we did
that
Yes.
dynamic working. It doesn't work very well.
It doesn't work. And so we had that strategic planning in SAFY's office, in our training office. And Dr. Laura Boyd not only worked with us as providers, but we invited her to come and work with our leadership at the county as well, because we wanted to impart with them what was happening nationally in our industry. How could they make some changes within their child welfare structure that would improve quality of care, improve their outcomes?
Yeah.
And so she met with our leadership. There was some discussion about things. There was some change around certain aspects of things. I think at that point, that's when we started seeing some changes in Medicaid and the leadership there. And it was, we had also gone to Reno. You know, you can't stay in your little town. You've got to go to Reno and talk to people. They don't know what's happening down here. So we had to go tell them what's happening. You know, you've made some changes with Medicaid. Let me share with you how this is impacting our community. Let me share with you what this does to children and families. They were appalled sometimes. They had no clue. They did not know. So you can't hold people responsible for things that they don't know. But once you do know, I'm holding you responsible.
Yeah, and you bring up a great point, is interacting and going to the seat of power. Sometimes we have to do that. And so as nonprofit leaders, we are natural advocates, and you've got to advocate on behalf of the clients that you serve, the community that you serve, the organizations, the entire sector of nonprofit organizations. And sometimes that requires you to move. You have got to go where the seat of power is. And for those folks that are not familiar with the demographics or the geographics of Nevada, some people think that Las Vegas, being the largest metropolitan area in the state of Nevada, that the seat of power would be here in Las Vegas. It is not. It is up north in the Carson City, Reno area in Washoe County, which is about 8 or 9 hours
that is correct
from Las Vegas. So that just goes to show how it is also in California, where a large population is in Los Angeles, but the seat of power is up north in Sacramento. And so there's, you've got to create some type of synergy when there's that distance between where you are serving folks in the community and where the seat of power is. And I've talked about even that dynamic of that tri-state Washington, D.C., Virginia, Maryland area, where they have the ability to engage and network with each other in a very close-knit way. And we question, well, why do these areas get the funding? Why do these areas get the grants? Why do these areas get this? They're close to that power center. And so sometimes you've got to move and make yourself known. That's another marketing and branding and collaboration and partnership and advocacy. That if you don't see the organization that you're in growing, maybe there's some shift that you need to make to get closer to a center of power. Ask some questions, ask to be introduced to some people, meet some people differently, go to some association meetings, some coalitions, shake it up a bit, do something different.
That is exactly right. That is exactly right. That is how you will also feed yourself, because we've talked about the burnout factor. You get burned out when you think you've got to do it all. You don't have to do it all. I don't need to be the expert of this, and I don't need to be the expert of that. I only need to know what questions to ask the experts.
That's right. That's right. Because you've got a circle of people. And I like what you said about, you don't have to be the smartest person in the room. You just need to have some smart people in the room.
That is it. That is it.
That is it. Can you share with us a little bit about how the nonprofit organization that you worked with, not only just SAFY, but maybe some others, how they were funded? What were the financial components and pieces of how you were able to manage these organizations and keep them moving and keep services flowing into the community?
Most of my work has been done at agencies that had large public contracts. They had contracts with our county entities. They had contracts with some state entities. And they also secure grant funding.
Were there ever like fee for services? Like, did some people pay a fee for the services that they received, or did they
We've
have
had,
insurance? Did you do insurance billing or anything like that?
yes. And that's one of those things I'm proud of. So all through my career, I kept hearing that you can't make a mental health clinic work. It never can work. It will lose money. And because it will lose money, many nonprofits don't want to do it because they lose money. But I don't understand how you're going to have a treatment foster care agency and not have a mental health component to that. That does not work for me. Nor do I see how you're going to be an asset to the community in cutting out the need for treatment foster care if we're not providing adequate mental health to families, and certainly families that may have less income. Mm-hmm. So we really, so I was able to meet it. So first, I met with my clinical director, Melinda Rhodes, and we hatched a plan that we were going to try and get on many panels. And Melinda and my then administrative assistant, Brandis, started trying to get us on panels. It was hard work. So then we found a private provider to help us do that, a contract.
When you say panels, just for those people who don't know, in the insurance industry.
Right. That's the Blue Cross, different Medicare providers,
Anthem,
Medicaid, Anthem. It's whoever, Cigna, whoever's insuring you, your providers, our therapists had to be on those panels in order for you as a potential client to come and pay us. Right. If our people were not on those particular insurance panels, we could not accept your insurance, and then we would not be paid. And then we can't stay in business if we're not paid. Okay. So we were trying to get on the various panels. Gotcha. And I was very proud of the fact that we were successful in doing that.
Yeah. Melinda, so eventually you had to go to someone who had that expertise and hire that out and say, help us out here. Yeah, that's important, because I think that as nonprofit entities, and I'm certainly one of those social entrepreneurs, I'm smart, I have degrees, I know how to read, I could figure this out myself. But you know, there's something about moving with a quickness, right? There's something about efficiency in order to be effective. So certainly I could probably figure this out, but it's going to take me a year to do it, when I can pay somebody else and they get it done in 30 days.
Not only that, they have the expertise, they have the relationships. Everything is about a relationship. And so they know when panels are opening, they know when certain panels are going to possibly do this or that, because they have relationships with the people on that panel. And so that allowed us to get on the panels that allowed our outpatient mental health clinic to become financially solvent.
Awesome.
The other good thing that we did, our current CEO at SAFY is a financial person. And so he worked with us to develop a financial model that allowed us to be sustainable.
Awesome.
And what that meant was, because we were sustainable, we had extra funds to go get training. And so we were able to be trained in Dr. Bruce Perry's trauma therapy. And I am so excited about that, because we have all seen what trauma does to a community and what it does to children and families. We know that they need help. The question is, what kind of help? I don't want just any old willy-nilly stuff happening to children and families who come through my doors. I want them to be served in a model commensurate with that of anybody with all of the income available to them.
Absolutely.
And so
good stuff.
I just want to give that shout out to the clinical department at SAFY, Melinda and Christine and Christy, and I'm forgetting people, and they might be mad, but I hope they're not, because they are so.
We won't share this video with them. No.
But because, you know, everybody says we need mental health. Nobody wants to do the hard work to make it accessible and available. These ladies did.
Yeah.
And my hat is off to them. Yeah.
Awesome. Hats off, ladies. Thank you so much. And so did you all participate in any fundraising? Like, did you all have any type of like annual fundraising events or periodic fundraising events? Did you guys do donor campaigns? I'm just trying to think about what else, you know, some nonprofit leaders may want to learn about or hear about that SAFY may have done well, or, you know,
SAFY is moving gently into that area of fundraising.
Yeah.
We have not had a board that took that on as their primary focus, but I think they are moving into that area of focus because they see the need.
I did see that you guys did a lot. You received a lot of in-kind donations.
Correct. That is correct.
Talk about that.
So we have recruiters that work with SAFY to help us recruit foster homes. But in addition to recruiting foster homes, they were also looking at what are some of the other community partners that may want to work with us. Some people call and say, I don't want to be a foster parent, but I'd love to do something. Excuse me.
Bless you.
And so they said, thank you. They'd like to do something. And so she would take those people and say, what do you want to do? Let's have a community meeting. And so through her efforts, we had allegiances with MGM, with Boys and Girls Club. Now our clinicians, when I retired, the last big thing that I was so excited about was our clinicians were doing a training on trauma therapy with the Boys and Girls Club. Why is that so important, you may ask, when you talk about community? Our children, many of our children go to the Boys and Girls Club for out of school time activities and support, but they get bumped out of there because their behavior was not, it wasn't so great all the time. And so we needed staff there to understand how to better interface with our children and to build some empathy and skills to interface with our children. And so it's building those kinds of alliances, those kinds of partnerships that I think are so key to healing our children, because that's in fact what we're charged to do.
Yeah. Did you guys get donations like around the holidays?
Yes.
And birthdays?
Yes. Yeah. If you went to a SAFY office, our SAFY office at Christmas time, you would see bikes, just bikes. And this is why I'm so proud of the Las Vegas community too. You've all seen those toy drives where you get toys that are a little questionable, they got a little lead in them. I'm not, they're not the A toy.
Not that we putting down the dollar store, but they were more dollar store and
they were more dollar store. No. Our folks bring Xboxes. Woo. Our folks bring gift cards for our teenagers. Our folks brought bikes that everybody in the family would want to ride, because they understand that when a lot has been taken from a child, we don't want to give them second best. They're not second best. We want to show them that you count and you matter. And so our community would provide that. When Halloween was there, people donated costumes. And so our foster parents could bring our kids in and they would select Halloween costumes. We would get donations so that when we had Foster Parents Month, we have a special luncheon with some trainings and things, but people in the community would donate things for a goodie bag so that our foster parents would get some goodies. We've had tickets. You think of all the major teams that have been here, they've all given us tickets. Now we can't get those Golden Knights tickets anymore, but when they first came, they were giving us lots of tickets. Come on,
they was flying off the shelves.
and in
go
fact,
Knights, go Knights, go.
Go Knights, go. And in fact, one of our SAFY board members is with the Raiders now. And so, these relationships are there, and we're always looking for ways in which to partner and leverage. But in addition to these companies that have provided us support, mattress companies, who've brought our kids out so they could see what a manufacturing company looks like, what entrepreneurship looks like on a daily basis. We've had those kinds of relationships. I think that, I was going to say, we've even had individual families. And I think about one family that invited our children into their beautiful home to learn how to cook. Because when kids age out, don't they need to know how to cook?
Absolutely.
And so they did that in their beautiful home with so much love and so much care. So it's those kinds of relationships that build the basis for a kind of family, right? It's not the children's biological family, but it's a kind of family. We had a group of Black employees from Amazon come and donate to our youth and do some programming with us. And then they made a donation to us last year. So, I mean, there are so many wonderful, wonderful people here in Las Vegas, and they want to help our children. And our job and responsibility is to take those gifts and make them work for our children in terms of providing a quality life for them.
Yeah. As we wrap up, Valerie, has there been, or what has been, kind of like an element of surprise for you in working in nonprofit or nonprofit leadership, or being a leader of nonprofit? What would you say was something that was kind of like a surprise for you? And that could be in a good way, it could be in a not so good way. What was surprising to you?
Well, I think over time, what I have seen change is the field moving away from social work and into money.
Mm.
And so, as I said, money is, it's the card. You got to have the money. But I think there's a delicate dance, a balance between listening to our ear for how to capture and maintain those dollars for the good of the people versus the program elements that need to be there. And so I have seen organizations move from what I would say are more social service mindsets to a more monetary mindset.
Mm-hmm.
And I think there absolutely is a place for that monetary mindset. I never want that to be misunderstood.
Mm-hmm.
But I do get concerned that sometimes more conservative elements that are not really a part of the community for the people are making decisions about people.
Mm-hmm.
And they think they're coming from a good place.
Mm.
But when
Yeah,
you
I
have,
know what's better for you
then you know. But I had a gentleman who's in a leader position, a high-ranking leadership position, and he told me he did not know that he was from a family of privilege, although his father went to Princeton and his family owned a company. And so he did not understand the dynamics of things as they were being discussed with him about the needs of our children and families. He did not understand why there was such a concern about the social justice issues that hit our community so much. When we're doing interracial placements, are we sure that the placements are working for the benefit of that child of color?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Do we ask those questions, or do we not want to ask because we just want to assume it's okay? Mm-hmm. It may not be okay. Yeah. And so pushing for our organization to have cultural competency training across the board for all 450 employees was something that I was extremely proud of. I'm extremely proud of the fact that we have instituted a DEI director in our organization, Demetria Scott, and she was an executive director, Demetria Parnell Scott. She was the executive director out of Alabama. Phenomenal young lady, so smart, so capable. And so I'm excited and hopeful for what that kind of position can do. But I guess I'm surprised by the lack of the naivety of people when they don't understand the role politics plays in our work. And when they want to undermine that role and act like, just can't we all just get along? That surprises me in this day and age.
Yeah, yeah. Finally, and thank you so much. If you guys have been watching, or if you guys have fast forwarded, you'll want to go back and watch the entirety of this video, because we have just talked about so much, and I appreciate you. And this is just really good. I'm going to have to go back and watch it myself, probably a couple of times, because I'll need to pick up those nuggets, because you were certainly putting so many out there. What advice would you give to our leaders? And I am defining leaders as founders of organizations that are nonprofit, board members, staff people, volunteers certainly are leaders that are engaged in nonprofit work with people in communities. What advice would you give to them at any of these levels?
Never underestimate the value of you. One person can make a difference. Power comes from within. It is not a position. Position power doesn't mean much because when you lose the position, you don't have the power. Ask some presidents, power not there. So you need to have personal power, and personal power comes from integrity, intellect, compassion, and care.
Oh, well, that is a whole lot. Thank you so much, Valerie Hicks, for being here with us today. I am so glad that our paths crossed. They have crossed in many different ways. At some point in time, you and I became also sorority sisters.
Yes, we did.
So I give deference to you. We are both sorors in the Delta Sigma Theta Sorority Incorporated.
Yes.
So thank you, soror.
You're
My
welcome,
Delta
soror.
dear. I appreciate you so much for being here with us today. I know that you all have learned so much from this video that we have shared. If you are watching this on social media, please feel free to like this channel, like this video, give me your comments, because if there is more that you want to hear from this particular guest, let me know that, and maybe she might come back and give us a little bit more on a topic.
Anything for you, Janise, anything for you.
I feel like you just gave us so much. I'm going, oh, what more could she give us? I know that there is a whole lot there, and we didn't even begin to unpack some of the things that we discussed. We've touched on them, but it was still really great. Anyhow, I really appreciate you. Thank you so much. You guys tune in. We are going to be releasing these videos on a weekly basis with different leaders to talk about nonprofit leadership, funding, all different topics that impact our communities and impact you as a nonprofit leader. So thank you so much again, Valerie, from the Nonprofit Leaders Academy and Grant Me Success. And I will see you soon. I know we've got to do lunch, so
we will be doing
get that
lunch.
date on the books.
Yes, we will. Take care. Thanks, everybody.
Have a great
Bye-bye.
day.
You
Bye-bye.
too. Bye-bye.